This is a review of Tales of Tamriel, Book 1, The Land, and Book 2, The Law. If you haven't already, I strongly recommend that you go back and watch the reviews I did for the Skyrim library. That'll help you get a good overview and understanding of what these books are and what's included, because both series of books are very similar, and I don't want to just be repeating myself for people who have already watched those reviews. But basically, these Tales of Tamriel is the exact same approach as we saw in the Skyrim library. It's just a collection of the texts that you find throughout the game. And so where the Skyrim library collects the books found throughout the world in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, these two Tales of Tamriel volumes collect the books found throughout the Elder Scrolls Online. The subtitles for these books, The Land and The Law, really doesn't mean much. It's just like with the Skyrim books where they've attempted to collect the texts thematically. As for the texts themselves, the quality of the writing and style of writing is very, very similar to what we saw in Skyrim. And although I don't know if these texts were written by the same person or people who worked on Skyrim, or if ZeniMax had a new person or people writing these texts for the Elder Scrolls Online, but the fact that I can't tell and that the writing is sort of so consistent between the lore books in Skyrim and Elder Scrolls Online, so even though I much prefer Skyrim the game, I think it's really good that there's no obvious division of quality between these two series. However, visually there are a few things with these Tales of Tamriel books that I actually do prefer to the Skyrim library. The art, graphic design, and presentation of the Skyrim books were absolutely fantastic. But these Tales of Tamriel books, they just do a few extra little things that push it even further. Like, for example, the pages look even older and have a lot of foxing and things like that. And that's sort of like a mind-blowing level of detail. And I mean, I really hope it was someone made that decision intentionally, because as you probably know, the Elder Scrolls Online takes place 1,000 years before Skyrim. So of course the books would, be even older and would have a slightly more decayed look to them. Obviously they haven't done it to the stage where it looks ugly or unreadable or anything, but it's just like a tiny little detail like that. If someone has actually thought about that, is just adding it. It's all about the immersion, and that's what these RPG games, are all about. Immersion, making things real. Another great way this book does that is in these two volumes there are little handwritten notes in the margins and things like that, which looks really cool, and then, it's again adding this layer of authenticity, making it feel like something that somebody has already read through and written on, and the book itself feels like it's got history. The problem with these handwritten notes, however, is that either I can't decipher them or they're deliberately meant to be illegible, which seems like a real missed opportunity to add something a little extra, especially because all of these texts can be found and read in the game. Having these little handwritten notes that you could read would just be, adding something that you don't get from the game. As for the art throughout, it is amazing. In my opinion, much better than the Skyrim books. You're getting a mix of black and white sketches, which I like those because they do feel like, someone has actually drawn them into this book. But then you also get the full color concept art as well. And even though a lot of that does have a sort of very digital modern look to it, it just looks so good and is integrated so well that I think it's fantastic. And I just think the visuals in this book have been done better than anything else that I've seen in any other lore books, because you've got things like the Diablo 3 books, which just use the black and white sketch style, which looks nice and authentic, but it really doesn't have quite the same visual impact as full color artwork. Or then you have something like the Warcraft Chronicles, which only had like a handful of art throughout the whole book, which is kind of a bummer. Or something like The World of the Witcher, which was also masquerading as an in-world book, but was using digital renders and comic book art and other sort of art that just was not integrated really well, so it was very jarring. Whereas in these books, everything has been integrated immaculately. Another cool thing about the art in this book compared to the Skyrim books is that Skyrim, as part of the collector's edition, did have an art book. A lot of the concept art in the Skyrim library is duplicated, so you'll have seen a lot of that stuff. While the Elder Scrolls Online never actually got what we would, strictly call an art book. The collector's edition did come with a book that has art in it, but we'll talk a bit more about that later. So for most people, all of the art in this book, it'll be the first time you're seeing it. And so I mentioned this in the Skyrim books, but I think it's important to stress that reading these books will not make you a sort of Elder Scrolls scholar. We've seen other books like the Warcraft Chronicles, the World of Ice and Fire, and the Dragon Age lore books, which really present the lore and history of these worlds in a more thorough way, going through the whole history and timeline, outlining exactly what happened. These are the races, these are the major cities, the major religions, and are a lot more encyclopedic in nature. And while that's definitely an approach I do like and enjoy, it's not what these books are about. They're presenting you with a different experience. Elder Scrolls lore is so deep and rich that trying to present this entire world as facts from beginning to end, first of all, you'd need about 10 volumes. And even though on one hand it would be nice to just sort of have the facts, again, sort of like an encyclopedia of Tamriel, but we already have like the wikis and stuff, and I think presenting that in book form would actually go against what they're trying to accomplish with the overall experience of the Elder Scrolls game and, merchandise, which again is about immersion. And that's really why I think these books are so successful, because entertainment and an experience is put ahead of, education. For example, one of the texts in the book is about the different motifs each of the races use in like their armor and architecture, things like that. And essentially everything it says about that is stuff you could observe just from playing the game. It really doesn't offer a whole lot of history or extra information presented about the lore behind the racial motifs. But the text itself is still interesting because it's being presented as part of the author's journal. And so as she's describing her experience going to these different cultures and observing these things, she's also writing about this love triangle that's developing between her and her two guides, as well as their attempt to travel to Oblivion. And then suddenly this chronicle is picked up by a character who was introduced earlier, and he attempts to continue writing it. And he actually does have a much more sort of learned approach to chronicling these racial motifs, and so it is a bit more history and lore heavy, but still intersecting with this story as he tries to make contact with the travelers who went to Oblivion. And so you're not just sort of reading about some dry thesis about the different races of the world. It's actually pulling you in with story, which I think is really great. And of course there are definitely texts throughout these books that are presented much more as like an official scholarly history, but I did want to mention that one because I do think it's sort of like the epitome of the approach they've taken. And having such variety, from something being, a personal journal to a prose story to a poem to more academic work, it's just so engaging. And like I said, you can read all this stuff in the game, but I know personally, I don't want to sit there and be staring at this small text on a screen when I'm playing the game. I want to be sort of, adventuring and stuff. And so then once I'm sort of tired of sitting there playing and looking at a screen, but my mind still wants to be in Tamriel, it's really great to have these books to then, sort of go offline and read these texts and really feel like I'm reading them. It's not like reading a wiki page or something. When I'm reading these books, because they are presented as authentic in-world documents, it really does still feel like I'm reading them as my character. And so it's like, just because I've left the game, it doesn't mean I've left Tamriel, and indeed all the different Elder Scrolls books that have been produced over the years. Everything is about immersion and keeping you in that world. Everything from the way the texts are presented to the actual physical properties of these books themselves. It's all pulling in the same direction and creating a great synergy of that same authentic experience you have in-game. I often enjoy reading these sort of lore books for games and things that I have never actually played. And so I just wanted to point out for anyone else who's like that, who maybe hasn't got experience with the Elder Scrolls. Unfortunately, just like with the Skyrim books, these books are not going to be a good introduction to the world of the Elder Scrolls for you. They do require at least a base understanding of this world, which is why perhaps if you're someone who has played Skyrim and or Morrowind and or Oblivion, etc., but you haven't played the Elder Scrolls Online, or you don't want to, but you're still a big fan of the Elder Scrolls, for you, I definitely think you can enjoy these books as sort of like prequel background material to the other games you've played set in the late Third and Fourth era. Some of the stuff relating specifically to the three alliances might be a bit confusing, but you'll figure it out. And if you hear anyone talking about like Elder Scrolls Online breaking the canon and things like that, unless you're like the sort of nerd who is actually writing those wiki articles, you really don't need to worry. There are definitely a few bumps, but overall I'm really happy with how ZeniMax has handled and expanded the lore. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is I saw in the Skyrim video, a lot of people commented that they were really impressed with how the books looked, but were a bit put off by the price. But I promise you, the quality you get with these books is a really top-notch production. So then the last thing I wanted to touch on was I made reference to other Elder Scrolls books that also are continuing this sort of idea of authentic in-world books. So when Elder Scrolls Online came out, they also released this limited collector's edition of these three books called The Hero's Guide to the Elder Scrolls Online. Now, those weren't actually like part of the collector's edition for the game. These books were like just released on their own. And I don't want to get into a huge rant here, but these are really the epitome of why I hate collector's editions and things like that, because these books were limited and very expensive, and as we move forward in time they become increasingly scarce and even more expensive. It means that 99.9% of fans who might enjoy reading that material, which was all like new and exclusive material for those books, are now never going to get to read that stuff and experience it. And that just seems like such a shame. I mean, I know one of the reasons they're so expensive is because of the quality of materials they've used. It really is very fancy, but it's the content of those books that I'm more interested in. Like, I'd be fine with them having their, fancy collector's edition versions if they also compiled them into a more affordable edition, like these books, just so that, everyone else could also enjoy it without needing to pay hundreds of dollars. And then also with the release of the base game and then each of the expansions, they have actually produced, as part of the collector's edition, these art books / journals that are very similar in style to these books, but I won't talk about those now because I do have them and we can take a look through those in the future.